Welcome to my basement, everybody. We have a wonderful show for you today, celebrating all things Midway and to celebrate the launch of an incredible documentary called Insert Coin. The filmmaker and game maker behind the movie, Josh Tsui, joins us. But along with Josh are three exceptional guests. We've got the voice of the arcades and specifically Midway Sports, Tim Kitzrow, with us. How's it going, Tim?
Boom shakalaka! How you doing?
Great to see you. We've got the creator of NFL Blitz and NBA Jam, Mark Turmell, with us. And we have the co-creator of Mortal Kombat, Tobias, with us. This is, it's like I've put the Super Friends together to celebrate one of my favorite video game companies of all time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Josh, I'm going to start with you because this is really to celebrate your celebration of Midway. Why was it important for you to put Insert Coin together?
You know, there are a couple of things that was really important for me. One was that, you know, these were games that people grew up playing, that they loved a lot. And many of them are still super popular now. And I really felt like I wanted to tell the story behind how these games were made and the people behind them. You know, I never felt like there was one like holistic view of the output of Midway games in that era, and just arcades, you know, in general of the 90s. The second reason it was important was that, when I worked at Midway, going into Midway, I was kind of a fanboy already and stuff, and so I really looked up to these guys that I worked with. And so many years later, and I've known them obviously for a really long time now, but I think the bonus of it was being able to kind of celebrate what they did.
We wanted to crush the player.
We want to give them a greater challenge.
Hasta la vista, baby.
And just, really show that, hey, these are the people behind the games, and really just bring them to the forefront.
That's awesome. Mark, you know Josh because he was part of the teams over there at Midway and worked on a bunch of games with you guys. Were you surprised that he was, venturing into this filmmaker direction? And did you think that it made sense for him to make this a project that he worked on?
Yeah, actually, it was not a surprise at all because I believe Josh actually has a kind of a film production, education and background. And so when he was at Williams Electronics Midway, we worked on, WrestleMania together. He was always keen on documenting and, getting the right clips and kind of leading us on the path of digitized graphics and, how to get that content into the game. So it didn't surprise me at all when this started, lighting.
John, talk to me about your sort of early days with Midway, because you guys were really young and you were making games that were just rocking the whole world. What was it like to kind of start with the company? And because it already had a history, Williams Electronics and Midway already had a massive 10-year or more success story through the 80s with all kinds of great games. Eugene Jarvis was already a legend, I think, by the time you joined the company. What was it like for you joining Midway back then?
It was actually kind of surreal, because I grew up in Chicago and I was aware that there was a pinball manufacturing plant, but I didn't know that there was actual video game development happening. And so a friend of mine, a guy by the name of John Vogel, who subsequently worked with us on Mortal Kombat, he was hired there first, and he let me know that there was an opening for an artist. And so I came in and actually interviewed with Mark and Eugene and a few of the other guys there, and was fortunate enough to be hired. But I was right out of college. I was 19 years old.
Amazing.
And have been in the industry ever since. So, working with fellas like, Eugene Jarvis and Mark, I wasn't totally aware of Eugene. Once I heard of the games that he was responsible for, I was in awe. I had actually played a few of Mark's games on the 2600. So for me, it was kind of a dream come true. For me at the time, I dabbled in computer graphics, and back then there was not a real curriculum that you could take in school, at the time, but I was also a comic book illustrator. And so it was kind of the merging of those skills that landed me the job. And I was fortunate enough that Mark and Eugene brought me on board.
Tim, you had already done a bunch of acting, and you were obviously familiar, I think, with the video game space. But when you were brought in to work on these Midway games, was NBA Jam the very first game that you did some voice work on?
I'd started out in the pinball division in the factory across the street, and was just fortunate enough to start out doing Gilligan. Maybe we could bribe Kona. Little Mr. Howell got me the gig, and once I was in, I was with the very talented John Hay, who was responsible for the great score for NBA Jam, and he was putting all the music and sound effects and hiring the talent for the pinball games. So when NBA Jam came along, that was the first video game that I was involved in, and fortunately, it was something where Mark just trusted John and my reputation there. For I think I'd done 10 or 15 pinball games at that point, and this would never happen today. A title like NBA Jam, they'd be auditioning everywhere, but Mark just said, "Yeah, Tim's good." I'm not sure Mark can probably tell a better story, but I was one of the luckiest guys in the world. Right place at the right time, but I had enough respect in the department, so couldn't be more exciting.
What was it like to hear Boom Shakalaka in an arcade while people were playing the game?
It was my Thor hammer. It was, I finally discovered something that, and I kind of recognized pretty quickly I would be known for it. I went to the arcades after the game came out, and I watched people playing the run and gun Konami, and it seemed like a kind of a big crowd around there. And I heard the announcer go, "Nice shot for two. Lays it up," and I was, "This guy on lithium or something? I mean, come on, you're supposed to be a sports announcer." So then I went over to the NBA Jam area, and there was a bigger crowd around there, and I heard, "Ugly shot, puts up a brick, boom shakalaka," and I went, "Yeah, man, that's gonna work." My favorite story, though, is, and I tell it in the insert coin, is I couldn't help but sit behind 10 or 15 people playing and want to start mimicking the dialogue and stuff, "Rejected, get that stuff out of here, boom shakalaka." Guy turns around and says, "Hey man, you sound like the dude in the game." I go, "Dude, I am the dude, boom shakalaka." It was a drop the mic moment, and to this day I still have fun doing that.
That is amazing, man. Mark, did you know that NBA Jam and NFL Blitz were going to be these phenomenons? Could you feel it in your bones? I mean, you'd already been involved around hits. You knew what was going to be successful, but did you know that those two games specifically were going to be rocket fuel for the whole video game industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to John starting in the company with Smash TV, George Kitzrow, who was a veteran, was on the Narc project, went on to do great things. He told me when John and I were going to put that game on location that we'll know the first night whether you have a hit or not.
Oh,
now,
wow.
No fucking way. You're not going to know if we have a hit the first night. But he was right. And the coin-op business is like that, where, in the case of that game, we saw people, going back to the change machine, getting their quarters, putting them in. The game would crash. They'd go back and get more quarters. And so the same thing happened with NBA Jam. The first night we had that game out on location, which is usually about 2 months, maybe 3 months before it's kind of really ready to ship. So we get a lot of testing in and fixing. We saw right off the bat that it was, resonating with the players, and, they were jumping up and down and, kind of screaming. I remember one player, he had picked John Stockton, and, he said to his opponent, "Don't even put the ball on the floor next to John Stockton. I'll take it every time." And he was crap. And I realized all the players are the same right now. Like there's, the expectation is that these players are distinct.
Right.
So go back and, keep on working on the game. But yeah, we pretty much knew right off the bat on any of the coin-op games, whether it was going to be a hit or not the very first night.
That's awesome.
You know what? I love that story because it reminds me of the music when you have a hit. And back in the old days, you had the jukebox, and if it went on the jukebox in a crowded place,
right.
And people keep putting the quarters in. I mean, that was Mark's. You can't get no satisfaction. It's like the quarters just kept coming and they never stopped.
And it's so funny, we don't live in that reality anymore, right? Like everything is, like the big challenge for every medium now is discoverability, is like, how do people find out about things? And there's something to this idea of physicalizing focus testing like this. And everything is focus tested, but it's sort of disseminated over the internet. But when you can put it all into a room and just see people gravitate to something, there's something profound about that, isn't there?
It is. I mean, it's like a democratic thing. We used to say that, well, it's true, no amount of marketing or hype would affect the sales of a coin-op game.
Right.
Because, we had only 100 or so customers that were the distributors. They would order one game. You'd say, hey, we have Mortal Kombat 2 coming out. How many do you want? And they'd say, I will take one, because they want to go and put it in a location, watch it for a few days, a week, and then they'll come back and say, oh, did I say one? I really meant 1,000,
I was just going to add that, one thing about coin-op in particular was that it was super organic, because I remember MK specifically, we had no cabinet art. It was just a black cabinet with like a Xerox marquee that we put in and turned on. And there's no pre-advertisement. There's nothing. You just turn it on and players will either gravitate or not. And so, in terms of like testing, that was sort of a true test. There's zero marketing. It's all just, the effort that we had put into the development of the game and this black cabinet in an arcade and the hope that players will gravitate toward it. And as Mark said earlier, you would learn pretty quickly whether you were going to be successful or not. I mean, I don't know that a game that dogged its first weekend test ever went on to be successful. Mark, you might know better than me, but I don't remember that happening.
Yeah.
So it's just like Hollywood, right? It's very similar to an opening box office weekend, I would imagine, right? It's the same kind of machinery at play there, I think. Josh, you were around this culture and these people and these stories, but I imagine that and some of it must have been legendary. But what I know about the video game industry is that it's always forward looking. It doesn't always take the time to kind of reflect and think on, on what has been achieved and sort of perpetuate its legends the way that it should in some ways. I'm curious about, the stories that you picked up for this documentary. What was the most revelatory or the most surprising or most enjoyable one for you?
That's a really tough one. I think the most I would say revelatory was how important Narc was. I before I worked at Williams Midway, I knew of Narc. I remember seeing it and just getting kind of like a visceral reaction to it. And so, but after that, by the time I got there, Mortal Kombat was a big success already. NBA Jam was already big and stuff. And so I kind of took Narc for granted. And so, as I started developing the film and interviewing more people, it dawned on me that it's like, a lot of the technology for Midway games moving forward in the 90s really came from Narc, and not just technology, but just the attitude about things. This is Jarvis coming back, and he's just like, hey, I'm gonna bring video games back to Williams, because it was primarily pinball at that point after the video game crash. And so him coming in and wanting to do this crazy 80s inspired action flick that's full of violence, and you're shooting pimps and things like that. It's like GTA 0.5 or something like that. But it was interesting because it's like the digitizing technology that it brought forward, all the tools that were created in-house for it, that affected games later on at Midway. And then just Jarvis coming back and with his crazy genius attitude. And we talk about in the film how it was a very punk rock attitude. It's like, hey, we're just going to do things that entertain ourselves, and hopefully everyone else will like it. I think that was really neat to see. And going into the film, I kind of had an idea that may be the case, but to really get that solid information was really nice to discover.
When I watched the movie, I was surprised to find out there was a bit of a conflict, I think, between, was it Bali and Midway, or Bali and and Williams?
Yeah, it was Bali, Midway, and Williams. Actually, that I would say that was also very new to me, because that was before my time there, so I didn't know a whole lot about that. And it was interesting. And Jarvis is just like, he's just besides being a great guy, he's just a character. And him to this day on camera, just talking about how, yeah, we just thought they were idiots or losers. And he says it with such venom. It's kind of like, dude, like, this is like a long time ago. You know? and so, yeah, it was interesting. And, it's kind of like the Cubs and White Sox. They're crosstown rivals and two big arcade companies in the same town. It was pretty nuts.
And Mark, you were there through all of that, weren't you?
Yeah, actually, I started in '89
wow.
Spring of '89. So I kind of missed out on some of that Valley, the pinball kind of rivalry and, threatening to purchase. And there was some, poaching back and forth. So I kind of missed out on that rivalry part. But we certainly had a lot of competition inside the studio trying to one up, the other game. Just one quick thing on the Narc. It definitely inflected, the blood that we put into Smash TV. I remember being really proud, calling Eugene over into my office when I had, Mutoid Man blowing up and, spewing blood out of his, torso. And we were just trying to go crazy over the top. John had just this amazing, he's an amazing artist. And so his, the limbs coming off characters, the blood, chunks coming out of Mutoid Man, things like that were really directly related back to what Narc, got away with.
It's one of my favorite games of all time, man. I can't get over it. I work with students quite a bit at the Vancouver Film School here in Vancouver. And every new class, they have to create games every class. Somebody creates a dual stick shooter. And I always bring up, have you played Smash TV? Have you played Robotron? And a lot of these kids, they just don't know, right? They don't follow. That's why your movie's so important, Josh. Like, it really shines a spotlight on some seminal work there. John, I want to talk a little bit about transitioning from, it almost like there was this natural sort of progression pivot kind of thing that was happening with NBA Jam, NFL Blitz, but I think Mortal Kombat we can also point to. It was like a new era for the company, but also for video games. And you lived through all of that. And you were 22, 23 years old putting these things together. What was it like watching this dream? And here you are, I think you were illustrating and conceiving the characters and the mythology, and suddenly the world claims it as their own. And what was it like being in the middle of this storm and seeing all of this stuff happen around you?
I get asked that question a lot. And I think, when I think back at that time, Ed and I were always so busy working that all the hoopla around the explosion of the game in terms of, its place in pop culture and stuff, I was aware of it, but we were so focused on the next iteration of the game and the next iteration of the game that I remember even when the film was in production, as much of as much as I was in awe of what was happening, I remember we were always kind of thinking about the work that we had to do on whatever it was we were working on at the time, and I think that had a lot to do with keeping us sort of grounded. If you know Ed, he's very, sort of very grounded and very humble about, what it was that, that we were responsible for creating. But we were always so focused on our work. And I think that was endemic of everyone in the studio. Mark had that work ethic early on. Eugene had it. Everybody was just always so heads down and lost in their work. And fortunately, we enjoyed it. We enjoyed the process enough so that it didn't really feel like work. It just felt like, like life. And I think because of that, I think, the explosion of it all, while I was aware of it, I was always sort of, grounded in the work involved. So.
Well, it's clear that it was a magic place. I mean, you guys made magic there. So whatever the ingredients were, it was happening. And Tim, I know that your work was, kind of as an outside vendor, sort of providing elements in there. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of the talent? When you'd walk into the studio to record your book, would you see these were video game masterpieces that these guys were creating?
It's pretty much, as John said, for all of us, I was only seeing the world, the way I had come to Chicago trying to get a gig as an actor. This was a side gig. It was fun. It was cool. It wasn't until the years later that we're gaining the perspective. And since meeting with Mark at the GDC to learn, and because of Josh's film, he said punk rock. That's the essential thing. This was the rebel, the radical, the anti-establishment thing, the way punk rock music was, the late 70s. It was kind of building on that. So if you think of when we were talking about going to like the Frank's place for games, like a dirty, dark place, what's that? It's CBGB's. Who shows up there, like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols. When you had a hit, like Mark said, the first night you knew it, same as CBGB's. The place we worked in, I was in the factory, the back of a factory. So that's kind of like the Motown aspect. Motown was up there in a blue collar lunch pail city, which Chicago's like. So you had all this talent, Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson. That's like Mark and John, those guys. They're just machines pumping out hit after hit after hit. And they had no time to take it in, as John said. It was just like, that's what you did. And that was, that was the music scene. That was that rock and roll element that can never really happen again on the level that Midway did. The bigger companies there's just too much sanitizing, too many, bean counters and everything else. The indie games may have elements of that, but on that large scale, you'll never see that again.
How much does Chicago play in that, you guys? Because John, you're from Chicago. Tim, you're from Chicago. You're a native.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It was certainly a different sensibility. I was already in 2000 when I first visited Midway. I had already visited lots of studios and teams and things, but there was a different sensibility at Midway. You could feel it in the air. I don't know if you guys could, but as a West Coaster, it definitely felt like a different place to work. But now that you've had time to reflect on it, how much does Chicago play in that?
I'm also from the West Coast. And so I have a little bit of perspective in terms of like how different things are. But I think the Chicago Midwestern attitude is, like really played a lot in terms of the work ethics. You're talking about Chicago, which was traditionally an industrial town, manufacturing back in the day. So there was a certain personality there of just getting your work done. And also, we were in the back of a pinball factory. So we saw like just how hard it was to work in a factory. We saw the assembly line, making games was not just software. Like we saw the physical parts of it. And so,
wow.
So I think when John is saying about how we were always kind of hunkered down to do our work, is that the work we did was really hard, but we were always tempered in that we see how hard other people are working, if not harder. Seeing that, I think that really affected our work ethics.
Eugene had a career that predated all of you guys. Had already sort of been there with the video game kind of boom, and I guess the bust, but the bust I think was just it was like embryonic fluid to kind of refashion what video games were all about in some ways. How much was he instrumental in sort of setting a tone and setting a vibe at Midway?
One thing first on the Chicago and the grittiness, the factory was really Neil Nicastro's, he felt it was his secret ingredient where, he kept everybody in that gritty environment. He didn't want to have new office chairs. We're working on cement, floors. We're walking through the factory, the cafeteria with all the hourly workers, and it's, we're sharing the same bathrooms. It's all like just a mess,
And that was, he conceived it that way. He wanted it that way.
I thought that, he thought that was great.
Oh, wow.
Eugene Jarvis and I walking out after midnight one night out of the factory, and there were loading bay doors where, the trucks would back in to take the pinballs out. And we saw the light was on and there was a Cadillac, backed up in there. And we saw, we looked over and Neil Nicastro was working in the loading dock, and he was putting carpeting on his dashboard or something.
I was there. I remember that.
And that was, he was in there working. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And he loved that about the setup. When we talk about rats, he loved it. When it was time to, refresh, it was, green paint on the wall and yellow lines on the cement.
There's a Breaking Bad element here. Mark always said that, creating NBA Jam was like, you were putting crack out on the street. He needed it to be so addictive. Get that next quarter. He knew what the kids wanted. He knew the pulse. What better place than a Breaking Bad kind of an industrial park on the river, a meth factory, a meth lab, factory conditions to get our product out at night. Perfect.
It's funny because for years, I had never been exposed to West Coast game development. And so I think I was well into my career before I had ventured out to the West Coast and visited, maybe a studio or developer and saw how they were
cushy it was.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I thought, but part of me, it's funny because I was a little jealous, that we were working in such a dive. But then part of it was kind of like a chip on my shoulder. It's like, we don't need fancy chairs and tables. We work on crates and sit on stools.
I remember that. I remember when when Midway got the San Diego office and when they bought Atari and the Milpitas out. I remember us visiting, and it's like, wait a second, they have clean vending machine. They have they get snacks. Like we didn't get snacks. But you're right though. But I remember thinking back, it's like, well, that's why they make shitty games. Because we have all this.
Neil was right. Yeah.
We knew when other developers would come in or potential partners, they were always shocked at the studio. I couldn't believe what was happening, and we would just tell them, don't buy anything on the bottom row of the vending machine.
That's the rats have their paws all over it. Right, What did Aerosmith think when they came in? They were probably right at home, right?
I think we cleaned up the place a bit.
We did, yeah. There was a whole 2 days of cleaning up, and then suddenly the shooting studio had pin-up photos of women everywhere, just to keep. I think it was on their contract clause or something like that.
And whiskey and porn.
Yeah.
Did they record in that little meat locker in the factory where we did jam and everything?
Yeah,
that was right. Yeah, it was not much bigger than a refrigerator in a modern home.
But circling back to your question on Eugene and his impact, definitely. I mean, he's he also, like Neil, embraced that kind of gritty attitude and do everything internal, and so it set the tone.
It seems I just interviewed Eugene a month or two ago, and it seems that Raw Thrills is sort of carrying on a lot of that, and staying true to the coin-op roots and all that. And it's interesting, you guys, Josh, you brought up the Milpitas office. I've been doing this so long that I actually visited that office back then. Oh. And I talked to Dan Van Eldren, who was an Atari. I don't know if any of you guys remember him, but he was an Atari holdout that had been there in the 70s. And he told me, and this blew my freaking mind, that they would make the games and then they would go into the warehouse and they'd put the cartridges together and stick them in the box so that they could be shipped out to the stores. Wow. And there's a physicality to the full distribution mechanism there that I think you guys all got to experience. You all got to experience it. You got to see these things get built and shipped out. And it's not just this thing transmitted into the ether. There's a physicality there, right? And that must be pretty cool. And I imagine all of you have some, mementos, maybe an arcade machine or two that dates back to that era. That's very unique. And, that's very special. And I wonder if, I certainly appreciate it. I'm sure that you guys do too. I guess I'm just I'm fawning over you guys like Chris Farley right now on Saturday Night Live.
Victor, I had one of my first memories of just being blown away by the whole experience. And I'd kind of fallen into, as I said, a bit of luck, the right time, right place. But doing Twilight Zone, I remember coming in for a late session, and they had shut the lights off in the factory, but there were about 100, 200 games, Twilight Zones, going on the floor. They leave them on to just keep playing all night to give them some, it's like slamming doors in a car test place.
To test
and I'm walking through there, hearing my voice, 200 Rod Serlings in a factory.
Oh, man.
Talk about the physicality. What voiceover person would ever have that experience of being in the Twilight Zone in Chicago on the river in an industrial park?
That's awesome. John, I want to talk about the the groundbreaking technical challenges that you guys faced with Mortal Kombat, because you'd already started to work with digitization, and obviously Street Fighter had kind of rocked the world with fighting games, and fighting games were becoming instrumental and incredibly important in the video game space. And then you guys said, well, let's put a movie into the video game and let people control movie characters. That must have been unbelievable work and unbelievably difficult work for you guys. Can you talk to me a little bit about dreaming that up, but achieving some of the goals that you set out for yourselves?
Well, I think so. For starters, with Mortal Kombat, I think we were beneficiaries of all the work. Josh had talked about the work that was done on Narc, and so the technology behind that, the tools that were created for digitizing, we inherited, and I think. Prior to MK, I had worked with Mark on a couple of games, and Smash TV in particular, all that stuff was hand drawn. And we had purposely made a choice not to digitize. I think it was maybe the scale of the characters didn't really lend themselves well to digitization. And so I had been sort of clamoring to take advantage of this technology that some of the other products were using. And so for MK in particular, because of the sort of the schedule that Ed and I were working under, it was a little bit hurried. We had to make some choices, and so the choices that kind of forced us into making was, we had to do digitized graphics because there was no time to hand draw this stuff. We did very little on the first game. There's sort of a raw aesthetic to it, and that's because we purposely chose not to touch up the character graphics because there just was no time. And so we just sort of let ourselves kind of fall into the raw quality of the digitized look. And I think that aesthetic, what you see in that first MK game, is because of those choices. Or a lot of that stuff, we didn't make those choices willingly. A lot of those choices we were forced into making because of the situation that we were in. And so we ended up benefiting from it. I mean, it affected not just the raw look, but it affected the design of the characters. A lot of the characters were only composed of 2 or 3 sets of colors. When you think of Sub-Zero and Scorpion, well, it was because of, the limited amount of memory we had to work with and the limited color palettes and things like that. And so I think it kind of forced us into making some good design choices with the characters that we may not have made had we not had those constraints. But I think that, again, I think that we were benefactors to a lot of work that was being done that had been done prior to us even starting that first MK game.
Did that mean that you knew that the sort of limited production schedule was going to mean that you'd had to sort of front load all of the stuff you put into the camera and all the stuff that you shot? Did you have to kind of have all the costumes perfectly designed so that they would translate to the game? Were you guys thinking that far ahead, or was it much more trying things out and seeing what worked?
Trying things out and seeing what worked. I mean, I was somewhat familiar with some of the issues because I had watched the other teams go through it. And so I understood, okay, well, this is a problem, or that's a problem, or the limited color palette is a real problem when you're dealing with, digitized graphics. And so I think that we were able to anticipate some of the issues, and the choices were based on, those things. But we certainly did not sit down and have it all planned out. Ed and I, a lot of it was try something, see how it works, try something, see how it works. And so, we had to find our way pretty quickly, again, because of the compressed schedule. But, at that time, that was my 3rd game. So I had kind of been through the ringer a couple of times.
What made you decide to part ways with Mortal Kombat? I mean, it was a baby that you had crafted and sent out into the world, super popular, and Ed's still making awesome Mortal Kombat games with a lot of the same team members, a lot of people that you work with. What was your decision there? And how do you feel seeing all the new Mortal Kombat games still coming to market, and all of these characters that were in your head still mean so much to so many people around the world?
It's amazing seeing all the new product. Obviously, and I think I get asked that question a lot, and for me, I'm almost kind of like a fan, and I look forward to seeing the latest interpretations of the characters that I had originated. and certainly the improvement in graphics. They're able to tell story in ways that we would never have even thought that would be possible, in games. Certainly not in coin-op games, but just in games in general. And so it's exciting to see that stuff, continue to live on. When I left, Josh actually left with me, but prior to that, we had been, there were some occasions where we were, I think we talk about it in the documentary, where we were, groups of us were approached by other publishers, to leave. Mark was involved, in a couple of those shenanigans with me in the 90s there. But by the time we had decided to leave, I think, me in particular, and I think, and again, Josh came along with, but we were looking at opportunities, in development, and we knew that there were some new consoles that were coming out, the Xbox and the PlayStation 2. And our understanding was that there was a window of opportunity for us to be able to take advantage of publishers looking for developers. And so that had a lot to do with our timing. There wasn't really it wasn't so much so that, that we were, I guess disappointed with kind of the way development was going or anything like that. It was more just, hey, here's an opportunity right now that only comes, so many years. And so taking advantage of that at that particular time, we thought was important. But it was very difficult to leave MK because, even when I left, that was, I think, after MK4, we had worked on this, on a spin-off product. But it was clear to me, even back then, that MK was something that was going to live on forever. As a pop culture icon, it wasn't going anywhere, and it was something, when you look at like the Batmans and the Supermans and the Spider-Mans, sort of these properties that just live on infinitely. I felt like Mortal Kombat had a chance to become that, and that I think has proven right. You just have to have a good iteration of the product to kind of bring it back. And I think as long as that continues, it's going to live on.
Well, dude, I was playing the game yesterday on a stream here, actually, and it's amazing to see your characters alongside Terminator and Rambo and the Joker. I mean, it's congratulations, man. I mean, it's cool. From your heart to the world like that is really damn cool. And that's also true with NBA Jam. And Mark, I know that one of the things that happened with NBA Jam is it also became this massive pop culture phenomenon, NFL Blitz as well. And that brought you entree into sports athletes that were becoming celebrities sort of at around the same time. It's amazing that this was like the Michael Jordan era, and everybody knew these athletes outside of the court, Dennis Rodman, all of these people. Do you have a crazy story or a crazy memory from interacting with some of these NBA All-Stars out there around the time of making the NBA Jam titles?
Yeah, it was crazy, the impact it had actually on the players themselves. I've told this story before, but it's so interesting that in the first few weeks of the game launching, I was contacted by representatives of Gary Payton, who had not made the cut for the original NBA Jam. He was he was a rookie year, but if you know Gary Payton, he's a real trash talker and happy guy. And so we asked him for his photographs, and he took all these pictures and sent them in, and we got him into the next version of the game, tournament edition, and I actually did special EPROMs for him. Then it led to Ken Griffey Jr. wanting to be in the game. Jordan wanted to be in the game because he had pulled out of, licensing of the game right before we launched.
Right.
And I even got contacted by Matthew Perry, who was on the, brand new show called Friends.
Right.
And he was a fan of the game, and he sent his pictures in and said, "Hey, can you make me, a special version?" Yeah, he actually had a bald spot on the back of his head back in those days, and he said, "Hey, can you paint over that bald spot?" But the most interesting story was, just Shaq. Immediately ordered, called to get 2 copies of the game. One for his house, and then one they actually put on the team airplane, which was the latest rage back then. Was
what?
The best.
Wow.
Would have their own private jet, so they would carry the game, the Orlando Magic, from city to city to city, and they would wheel it into his suite. And so when I eventually talked to him, he said, "Yeah, we wouldn't go out, we didn't go clubbing.
Oh wow.
We sat in the room and we gambled." I've had a lot of people over the years come up and say, "Hey, I was never really a fan of the NBA, but I was a fan of NBA Jam. Then I became a fan of the NBA."
Yep.
Seems preposterous to say that video game could have an impact on the popularity of the NBA, which is this, juggernaut, property. But I think it really did, especially back in that era where, back in those early days, the finals weren't even broadcast live. You'd have finals like, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, that would be 11:30 at night, East Coast time. So I think that the NBA wasn't as big as it was at the time, and we actually did inflect, some of that popularity of the younger crowd just based on the game.
It was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm. It was the culture and the game content and superstar athletes. Man, it was perfect.
Mark was as responsible, I think, for the NBA's, really just blossoming in that era, as was Jordan and all the new people. I talked to David Stern, rest in peace, a couple of years ago at the Hall of Fame, and told him that NBA Jam had made $1 billion that first year. He had no idea. And he was the marketing guru at the time, but being older, he wasn't as in touch. Had the NBA had someone with Mark's genius to say, "Hey, how about we make a video game like this to showcase the NBA talent?" And I've had people from around the world tell me too, South America, that they had no idea what the NBA was until that came along. So that was the internet.
It globalized it.
That's exactly what happened. People fell in love with it. How about players and teams you would never know, because back then the NBA only had a couple select games, which was the Knicks, the Bulls, or the Lakers, whatever, once a week. So now all of a sudden you're familiar with, guys on the Mavericks or Orlando, whatever. So he really single-handedly, did that for the NBA, I believe.
Which begs the question, why the hell is there not new NBA Jam titles now? What is like honestly, like this is the perfect time to capitalize. There's amazing superstar athletes out there, and 2K does an incredible basketball simulation every year. But holy crap, is it time to have an accessible, arcade sports? Yeah. Mark, why is there no NBA Jam or NFL Blitz for that matter?
Yeah, Mark, why?
After Midway melted down, I did join Electronic Arts. They bought all of the sports games, the rights to those. And so I was, part of the effort to make the NBA Jam that came out around,
2010.
Yeah. I also worked on the NFL Blitz before leaving to join Zynga, where I'm at today. And so there was interest to revive those, but you can't go to the well on those every year. Of course, like a sim, it's got to be a particular cadence.
Yes.
But right now, with the arcade one-up, business, like I go into Costco, I see these cabinets all over the place. I talked to them last week. I think they're gonna outsell maybe 2x the original NBA Jam cabinets this year at retail.
That's incredible.
And the NBA Jam arcade one-up title that's out that you can buy, everywhere, is it actually has NBA Hang Time and NBA Jam Tournament Edition. And Hang Time has even, finer tuned gameplay and, the alley-oops and all that. So I think they'll live on with, with that consumer version, that coin-op version. For the home.
I guess it's kind of hard to, and this probably speaks to that physicalized kind of, because there's a Mortal Kombat arcade machine from Arcade 1-Up as well. I'm sure that's doing very well too, but it speaks to what you guys built. Like it's pretty hard to, there's this collectability element of it, and you want to have the whole cabinet sort of as you remember it, but there was also some magic in the making of it all together, the hardware and the software all kind of working together. And that's what these arcade units kind of recreate. And it's hard, I think, and you guys saw this too through all the home versions of your games, it's hard to match that on a Super Nintendo or even a PlayStation 5, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there was a lot of tuning and tweaking that went into those games too, to make them have a lot of variety and to hold up. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that work in that era.
You guys are all vets of the business. You've all been doing a lot of things, and worked with Midway, but also lots of other companies along the way. And we all know, collectively, that game companies of any kind have kind of lifespans, and there's an ebb and a flow to it. But it always, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, and it always kind of shocks me that Midway as a brand doesn't persevere, right? Like, people just don't really talk about it as a modern game brand, as a company that's still creating output out there. And I want to ask each of you, kind of what happened from your perspective with that, and maybe your favorite memory of what Midway represents for you. Let's start with you, Josh.
I mean, I wasn't, I had left Midway at the end of '99. So anything I say in terms of what happened to Midway after that is pure speculation on my end. But, in the context of the film, it was basically, the industry changed, the idea of going to play a game in an arcade just didn't seem to make any sense in many ways, economically or even just, enjoyment wise, when suddenly consoles, were just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the hardware that the arcades had. And so, and it wasn't just Midway, it was just arcade gaming in general. And so, I think, my theory is that as time moved on, Midway had so much arcade in its DNA that to shift over to larger form games, games that people were expecting, like that had to be up to a certain scale, was going to be much more difficult. And I think there was just a lot of challenges there. In regards to some of my favorite memories, it's funny because a lot of people have great memories of the games themselves. I have great memories of making the games themselves, and John brought this up before. It's like, we worked crazy hours, and everybody worked crazy hours, and it wasn't like a mandated crunch or anything like that. We were young. We just wanted to make great product, and the camaraderie amongst everybody, all working really hard together at all hours of the night, all knowing that we were trying to make the best thing possible. That has always stuck with me. Looking back on, now that I'm older and I have other obligations, I realize, man, there's no way, like, that type of crunch is just insane, But for myself personally, I'm glad I went through it. And again, it was that camaraderie. There was a lot of rivalries at Midway, but there was always, underlying all of that, there was always this sense of respect that, like, hey, everybody is here for a reason, and they're doing good, hard work.
John?
Similar to Josh, I mean, I think certainly the friendships that we made while working together were incredible. I mean, it's friends, everyone that, a lot of the folks that I worked with back then, friends for life. We kind of all went through that together, and so that had a huge impact on me personally. And then I think it was just sort of the love for gaming that I think was developed, through the work. And watching folks like Mark or Eugene or Josh or Jack Hager or, all the folks that I was lucky enough to work with, watching them put everything they had into what they did there was very inspiring for me as a developer. And so that's something that, beyond Midway, I kind of carried with me. And so I think that's, when I look back at it fondly, it's more about the friendships that were made and the good habits that I think were developed. As Josh said, the work hours were very difficult. I don't think, I was fortunate that I was in my 20s when I was there, because I don't think I could have done it in certainly my later years here. But but as I said earlier, it was more than work. It really just felt like life. Like we were just living life, and life was creating games. And when you love it, it made it easy.
Awesome. Mark?
Yeah, so some sad times there. Ed Boone and I went down with the ship on Midway. a lot of, reasons the gears were turning. Coin Op clearly had the technological edge over the consoles, but the consoles were creeping up on us. And so we were always running scared. We knew that maybe our window was, closing to continue to be successful there. We were still 60 frames a second on every game that we would make, and the consoles still weren't quite there.
Right.
It wasn't until we decided to dip our feet into, doing the console titles, original console development, where we realized that we didn't have the production, kind of management, professionalism that's required to make, to make a game on schedule.
I want to stop you real quick though, and give you props and shout outs for Stranglehold and PsyOps, which I don't know if they were made internally at Midway, but Midway brought them into the world, and they were both incredible games. And I get asked about PsyOps in particular all the time.
Yeah, Brian Eddy. Yeah, no, that was a super young team. Right there in the mix. And what happened though was Neil Nicastro, kind of saw the writing on the wall, was taking a lot of pressure, I think, from maybe the financial community. So he moved out and appointed, a new president, CEO, and that new management really decided to go all in on console. And they gave, Snoop Dogg millions of dollars to fashion a game for us.
Right.
They gave, Shaq millions of dollars to shoot a commercial for a new basketball game that was being, developed somewhere else. And so Ed and I were, seeing this happen all around us, these investments of $10-20 million that didn't make any sense. And we couldn't stop it.
Right.
We talk, together, we would be in meetings looking at these pitches and saying, man, this is no chance of success. But it was out of our control to continue these different projects. And so it was a combination of the pressure to get into console, not having the skills to do the proper production on a game like that, and also new management that came in that really listen to some of the old school guys. Made their own way, and unfortunately drove the company into the ground.
Oh man, Tim, your perspective obviously was you were a part of this rocket that was flying, and then all of a sudden it didn't fly anymore. Like the world, there were no more NBA. That must have been very weird for you, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think of. I always love the music analogies. Like Mark wrote "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." I said before. Luckily, he couldn't sing it, so I got to be the singer on the #1 hit. And then guess what? Then he had NFL Blitz, and then there's his next Honky Tonk Woman or whatever. I was the luckiest guy in the world. I was like a session musician for the Wrecking Crew. The guys who were the Beach Boys and hundreds of singles. So I was that guy. So I got this different view than all these guys have outside looking in a way, because I wasn't in the inner sanctum. I was the session guy. But going back to why we're here, Josh's film captures this moment, this brief history in time, Stephen Hawking's of the video game world. It happened it was like the end of the silent film and the talkies came in. That's where I came in. It's like speech was very limited in games. I got to go from that period, from the very beginning. NBA Jam might as well have had 15 or 100 calls in it. You can name
Dude,
them.
You're so right, man. Like Sinistar was just mind blowing.
Run, beware.
Then here comes Tim Kitzrow.
It was like this. John came in, gave me a script. He said big, he said loud, and I went, "He's on fire! Rejected! Boom shakalaka!"
So I got in literally on the ground floor, and on the way out, we're doing tens of thousands of calls for NHL hits, Slugfest, Blitz. So in that little window, that 10 years or whatever that I was there, you know, it went from the excitement of the arcade to then Napster, and the music industry was changing. Everything was changing. So yeah, these guys said the writing was on the wall. And then unfortunately it crashed and burned, but maybe the way it should have, because there was so much talent, so much energy, like a great band, it had to implode at some point. When I go back to conventions, I see a dad coming in with his kid. He's playing the arcade, and there's a 3-year-old in a stroller with a download game, and I went, there's the two different generations, you know?
Yeah.
It's like watching a 70 millimeter film on an iPhone or something now. You know, it's like the difference. That's, people want easier, they want cheaper, they want faster. What I miss most is the community that we had. Even as I said, I wasn't as a part of the social crew, but that game community that I feel now, and seeing the people around the arcades, that's what I miss. Like, it's a new world. You know,
yeah.
but thank God there are conventions, and there are guys like you. Like, there's a whole generation of people who grew up when this will never happen again, and I'm just so lucky to be a part of it, as all these guys are. I
don't know about that, Tim, because, you know, the other thing, we've all been around the block for a while too, and watching this stuff. There, like things like Arcade 1-Up. Who would have predicted that, and it becoming such a big success? Yeah. Like, it's created this whole category, and you know, Josh's movie, I think, is going to shine a light. Yeah. And so people are going to like wake up a little bit again. And this is an industry that likes cycles and likes to kind of celebrate itself when it pivots in that direction. I'm going to end with you giving me the game that best typifies what Midway represents for each of you individually. And it doesn't have to be one you worked on. What's the game that first pops into your mind? Let's start with you, John.
Narc. I would say Narc. Easy one.
That's awesome. All right, Mark.
You know, well, Robotron is my favorite game of all time, and the reason
that's awesome.
And joined Williams Electronics at the time. But for me, you know, looking at Mortal Kombat and the excitement that generated with the blood and the gore and the violence, you know, spawning, you know, films, you know, is really at the top of the heap for what is Midway.
And Tim?
As great as NBA Jam was, I think NFL Blitz, Mark really hit his stride with taking it to that the irreverent level that Midway's known for. When he took everything that he had done, Major League Sport, it can be summed up by saying, totally unnecessary, but a whole lot of fun to watch.
That's awesome. And Josh, you've been documenting this with a passion, and probably a lot of that same kind of mid-20s passion that you first brought into the like never sleeping type passion. So Midway's been on your mind a lot. What's the first game that pops into your mind
nowadays? I mean, I would say for the most part it would be Narc, just because it was just the beginning of so many things. But like what Mark said, Robotron was still one of my favorite games. It affected me so much back in the 80s when it came out. So you can see how the attitude from Robotron got into Narc and so on.
Josh, your movie is going to be released very soon, and people are going to be able to watch this everywhere. You've been in festivals and everywhere. Where can people watch Insert Coin?
It's going to be released on virtual cinemas, partnering up with Alamo Drafthouse On Demand on November 25th. So, so it'll be, right now it's, we're doing this thing with independent theaters all around the country. Right now, because of, the current conditions, people are not necessarily going to theaters. So a lot of local indie theaters are hurting. And so we're partnering up with them where, let's say there's a local theater near you, you can actually buy virtual tickets to see a screening of the film through that venue. And
wow.
Here in Chicago, I'm super happy. There's a theater called Facets, and a great venue, known for their independent cinema. And people who love Facets can support them by basically going to their site and ordering the film through them, and they can stream that night or however, whatever the window is going to be. Alamo Drafthouse is the main partner that we're working with, and they have theaters all over the country, and they've been amazing getting the word out on it. So November 25th it comes out, virtual cinemas, and then shortly after they'll be on various video on demand platforms.
Amazing, man.
Yeah, and you can go to insertcoindoc.com. On the screenings page, you'll see the listings of all the different theaters that we're partnering with.
So I've never heard of that. So the theaters, you actually can buy a ticket and support the theater, but you can watch it at home and in a safe way at home. I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something it's been around for a little while, but it's since the pandemic, it really has grown a lot. After South by Southwest got canceled, the theater industry had to really, think quick about, hey, how do we still, get people to watch new movies? And so this has arisen, and a lot of, when you have films like Trolls World Tour, they bypassed theater and went right to virtual cinemas instead. So this is kind of a byproduct of that.
Wow, that's great. And everybody needs to see this movie. It's wonderful. And you guys have all, crafted and delivered such incredible contributions to this medium and to this wonderful company. This was a real thrill for me, guys. That was Mark Turmell, John Tobias, Tim Kitzrow, and Josh Tsui. The movie is called Insert Coin. Make sure you guys play that. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. And we will see you soon. Until then, play forever.